Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the 4 Steps to Solve Cloud Efficiency Challenges webinar. My name is Daniela, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I'm excited to introduce Andrew Hillier, CTO at Densify, and Antoine Duran, FinOps consultant at Accenture. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
They will lead the session today and take us through the solution that the 4 steps are built upon to learn about how integrating financial operations with advanced analytics can significantly advance your FinOps strategy. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic on over to Andrew to get us started.
Thanks, Daniela, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to talk for a bit, then I'm going to hand the mic to Antoine, and then I'll kind of close it off. And I want to start with this slide, and we start a lot of our webcasts, presentation with this slide, because I think it's very informative on the priorities in FinOps. And you can see the latest, I think this is the most recent survey, the 2024 survey, where some of the top items are reducing waste of resources. Highlight the ones in the red here that we think are pretty important in reducing waste is empowering engineers to act, policy, FinOps, governance, that type of stuff. We usually focus on those things because we see that as a software vendor out there, one of our focuses is making sure that we generate actions that people can and will take. And we've seen solutions out there where that isn't the case, where to get people to act or to empower them to act is very complicated. So we tend to focus on that. I'll go through a bit of what our software does. The cool thing about this is, of course, I'm joined by Antoine today from Accenture. We do team up with Accenture, and between what we do and what they do, we hit off pretty much this entire list, the black ones as well. So that's the exciting thing about the collaboration we do. We also jointly collaborate with Intel. I'll talk a bit about that at the end. And the nice thing is we can hit off all of these things, and we do so together in customers. So I'm going to talk a bit about the software side, and then Antoine will fill that out with the bigger picture from the Accenture perspective. The other thing I want to do to tee this up, not a lot of marketing slides here, but I think this was important. If you look at the cost challenge, the way we like to view it is a bit of an iceberg, where there's the tip of the iceberg is the kind of the discounts and the amount you're paying, the rate that you're paying, what you would call the rate. And then there's this huge part under the water of how much resources you're actually using. And I like to show this not because one's more important than the other. They're both equally important, but a lot of customers have done a good job of buying discounts. I don't think we ever see a customer that doesn't have some kind of discount plan in place. So the incremental gain of focusing on that becomes less and less, as opposed to focusing on the resources where there's just a lot of over provisioning. And so that's an area where we like to play, a combination with getting the best rate possible, but also running as little as possible or the right amount of infrastructure to host your workloads is key. And so that's the angle that we take to it. Getting to the optimal part of that bottom part of the iceberg, again, is what we focus on as software and what Antoine and teams focus on as consultants in this space. So that's what we'll try and focus on, is the resource optimization side of the equation. So to that end, what is Densify? We are AI-driven analytics designed to optimize cloud and container resources. It's not just cost, it's performance as well. Although, again, a lot of the times the business driver for this is a really large bill. So that tends to be a big focus. And we do it across the major cloud providers, the big 3, plus Kubernetes in those big 3 and Kubernetes on-prem. So I'm not going to talk much about Kubernetes today, but it's a big area as well, because we're finding it is a big area of cost and a big area of risk. So that's a separate topic. We're just going to focus mostly on the cloud optimization right now. I'll use some various examples from Amazon and Azure to make the point, but we do cover all 3 major providers. Okay, let's get into the challenge that from our perspective, the software that tries to solve this in resource optimization. The challenge is it can be very difficult to pick the right instance in the cloud. So let's just say, as an example, you have a workload. It could be a web server, database server, whatever it is, running on an M3 extra large. Just a pretty old instance. It's probably not the best one for your workload, given all the newer stuff. And it was a 4x16. Now, what do I do to optimize this? Where can I go? Well, this is where it starts to get really complicated. There is an M1 in the catalog, but you're not going to go backwards. That would be kind of weird. There was an M2 as well, but it's been discontinued, and it wasn't really even an M. It was more of a high memory instance. There's an M4 extra large, which obviously looks like a great progression, but there's a bunch of differences in this. Paravirtualization, classic networking, you lose your local disk. So if you go to EBS, can it handle what you were doing on your local disk? These are where it starts to get very murky. And this is the kind of thing we focus on. We have a very deep policy engine that will tell you if you're on an M3 and you're using your local disk, maybe you shouldn't go to an M. Maybe there's a better choice for you. As time progressed, of course, in the case of Amazon and all the providers, there's more and more differentiated offerings. So there's an M5, which requires different drivers. There's a interesting M5ZN, which It actually has really fast per core performance. So it's even kind of not an M either, but it's really great for certain workloads if you can figure out whether it's good for your workload. This one has a disk, again, which is probably appropriate. And then we get into more and more differentiation. Sixes, there's fast CPUs, but no SSDs, or there's Graviton. And it's a bit of a minefield to figure out which one to move your workload on. And that's exactly what we focus on, is optimizing the instance selection through very deep analytics. We're still not done because it may be that you're better off on a memory optimized or burstable, or the case is. And the bottom line is there's more and more offerings in the cloud, and the odds are there's the exact right one for you, but it's very difficult to figure that out with the right analytics. And it even varies by region. So even if you think you have the right one, it might not be in the region that you're in. So this is kind of a very technical problem statement for optimizing resources. What we find is that a lot of times it's easier just to stay parked on the M3. There's newer ones, there are faster ones that you could be using, but to figure it out, nobody had the time to do that, or it's just too complicated, especially for thousands of cloud instances. So this is the problem we focus on. The way we solve it is, again, through deep analytics. So we start by getting the utilization data, the metrics from the providers. It's agentless. It just uses the APIs. For containers, there is a forwarder that's required. But for the clouds, it's agentless. And we apply machine learning on these patterns to figure out what are the meaningful patterns and levels of activity in this environment. So for example, one of our main algorithms will go back through time and say, between midnight and 1 a.m., what typically happens in this workload? What about 1 and 2 a.m., 2 to 3 a.m.? And we go back and have a learning period to say, well, based on enough data, we can converge on a pattern saying this is what this thing typically does. This is its peak and sustained activity. We also build out busiest day models, quarter end, that type of stuff. So we build a series of models to characterize the workload. And this is key to figuring out what it runs on. Obviously, the level of this is important. The shape of it is also important. The composition of the workload. And we do that for CPU, memory, all the IO characteristics to get a very deep model that's geared towards figuring out what we should run this thing on. And it's very difficult to do this by looking at a Grafana screen because the peaks and valleys don't make much sense. This is a much more advanced model, pattern model of what's happening. We also get the configuration details. Are you using premium storage? How many NICs, HBAs, that type of stuff. Our policies apply to all those things. We can even detect running software to say that thing's running TensorFlow. Maybe we can put it on this CPU that has an accelerator. Tags, all this comes into place. We get a very detailed model of the demand in the cloud. And then we analyze it against the entire cloud catalog. So in the case of an Amazon, it would look a bit like this, where we're saying, okay, this is all the offering that Amazon has. This actually isn't all of it. This is the commonly used offering in Amazon. How does this workload score against all of those instances, and which one should I be using? So again, a very deep analysis based on very deep models to come up with a very well-informed answer of what you should do. Now, I'll describe this in a little more detail. This map is interesting because I don't think anybody's ever seen Amazon's product before. It's usually a long web page that you scroll down saying what all the instance types are. But this is it in 2 dimensions. We nickname this the periodic table. And the way you read this is across the bottom are all the instance families, and up the side are all the sizes. So it's pretty intuitive when you look at it. And you're currently running on an M4 extra large. And we're saying, well, you know what? You can run on an R7i large. And the red, I'll pull this up, are the ones that you can't run on because they don't have enough memory or CPU or IO bandwidth. And the fact that we're down a level to the right is kind of Moore's law in action. The newer ones are so much faster, you can get by on a smaller size than you could in a Gen 4, Gen 5 type of scenario. So the red is the stuff that's just not big enough to fit you. The orange is the stuff that's failing at the rule, the policy engine. So we don't want to go on to something really old. We might have a policy saying, let's not stay on 10-year-old gear. Let's not accidentally go on a GPU-enabled instance. These ones are running a different CPU architecture, so your app might not work if you go into those. That's a rule that you can use or lift depending on the workload. If you had local storage, then all the ones that don't have local storage would show up as orange stripes as well. So again, very detailed analysis of what you can and can't run on from a technical perspective. And then the yellow is the cost angle. And we're saying those things will technically work, but they're just too expensive. And the dividing line between the yellow and the green, you can control through what we call a spend tolerance policy. And I'll talk a bit about that in a little bit. So in this case, the yellow is technically viable, but not wise. And the green, all the green ones, the optimal one is on the right, but all the green ones will work within the certain spend tolerance. If you're willing to have certain leeway on spend, they're all viable candidates to use. And again, I'll talk more about that. So this is a core analysis construct in our product that lets you do a bunch of different things with it. I'll talk about those things. But the 2 main ones are what we call cloud resource optimization. So we're telling you the best one is an R7i large. Just make it an R7i large. And there's various ways to do that. You can open change tickets. You can do Terraform integration. Of course, Antoine's going to talk about this in length. We have a very sophisticated way of doing this with Accenture to campaign around this and get the app teams to enact that recommendation. And huge benefits on that. It's probably going to work better. It's going to be cheaper. And that's the holy grail. Back to that FinOps Foundation survey, this, in our view, is the path to solving that top challenge, is to drive out waste effectively with accurate answers that are implemented by the teams. The other way we'll talk a bit more about towards the end is a newer way we call cloud resource control. So it's not actually making it the best one. It's saying, well, I'm just going to make sure you stay in that green area, and integrating with policy engines and say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You do whatever you want, but I'm going to warn you if you're running something that's too expensive or doesn't have a disk or is too small. And I'll talk a bit about that. So it's a newer way to do it, which we find is interesting because it means you can engage in a different way with application teams to take action. Instead of hounding them with reports, you can just put in place a policy engine that's going to warn them in their tooling if they're doing something that there's a better way to do it, but you're still letting people do whatever they want. So we'll talk about both of these areas and dive into a bit of detail. So let's start with optimization. They kind of just making it the best. This is drilled down into our UI. We're down to the level of a cloud instance. So there's 2 cloud instances here. And you can see there are a couple of recommendations. In this case, one's an R4 2 extra large onto an R7 IZ extra large. And so this is an interesting case because we're going to a smaller instance, but a much newer instance. If I look to the right, this instance they were on is $313 a month, and we're going to save almost $100 a month by doing this. So great financial benefit, but even more so, if you look at the bottom here, the current instance is actually not big enough to run this workload. We're getting a little uncomfortable. This is the 24-hour CPU model, and we're going a bit above the threshold, saying we might want to get off this one. We're going to get pressure pretty soon. And so that's this left curve, the blue curve. The green curve is the predicted view on that new instance type, and it's going to be lower. So not only is this instance cheaper, it's actually faster. And Antoine and I have been in discussions with application teams jointly where this is pretty high value. They're going to save money, but it's actually going to work better for them. And when you show an app team, hey, we're going on something newer, we're going to put you on something newer. It's like I'm going to give you a new laptop that has much faster CPUs. It has fewer CPUs, but much faster CPUs. There's actually benefit in that. And Antoine will probably touch on that a bit in his slides as well. This is a great answer. Let's make it so. All of this is available through APIs, which again, we'll talk about how we integrate into the Accenture processes with this. And there's also what we call an app owner report, which gives the details, the rationale to the app teams of why we're making this recommendation. And I can't underscore enough, this is very important. It's not enough to have the right answer. You have to explain why it's the right answer. And then as we'll get into, that's not even enough. You have to make sure the application teams understand it and can prioritize it and do it. But on the app owner front, so we generate a report that gives and I think, Antoine calls this, put out the rationale for doing this. And it has things like, what policy was enforced? Well, we looked at the last 90 days of data using very conservative policies and all these thresholds. And we're saying that this is what you should do. And this is what it's going to look like. And so again, the detailed rationale for that, you're going to be good. You're going to be better off. And the rule engine didn't find any showstoppers. You don't need to change your drivers. You don't need to change your boot image, and you can save. So this is why this is a great recommendation. And again, when you put this in front of the app teams, it's very logical. There's no reason why not to do this unless they have some very strange requirements. So it makes for a great discussion and then greases the wheels for action. Very precise recommendations, showing our work to say why you should do this. And then comes the implementation. And so we basically do a lot of different integrations into the ecosystem. So you think of what we do as getting the data, driving all that analytics I described to say, this is the best one, and then sending it somewhere. And we have an ITSM module that can open tickets. We have an integration with Cloud Easier, which is Antoine's group in Accenture. So there's multiple ways of doing this. We'll talk obviously a lot more about that one. And ultimately getting the app team to take action, including giving them that report saying, hey, here's the recommendation. Here's all the reasons why you should just go ahead and do it. So very effective at getting change to occur and driving campaigns around this optimization. Now, I'll mention on the optimization front, we do also have a Terraform module that it's a line of code you can put in your Terraform. So when we see an approval, you can also answer back with a new answer, and that can happen in a more automated way. So this is very consistent with the ITSM and with the Accenture integration. It's just if you want to have the app team say, I'm good with it, and have it happen automatically, that's possible as well. Or they can do it through whatever means they see. So various ways, powerful ways to get the action taken. Now, again, there's a lot of detail on what happens at the top part of this diagram. And so at this point, I'm going to hand off to Antoine to talk about the Accenture side of the equation and how this fits into their much bigger picture.
Thanks, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, I'm a FinOps lead, and my job is basically leveraging high quality inputs so that a good idea can turn into realized savings, which can be shown back ultimately to the businesses benefiting from it. So we have a commitment in which we are operating what we call FinOps as a service. And so we set the strategies, show how we intend to iteratively improve the FinOps practices, and it comes on a number of levels. Obviously, there is the cost optimization, but there is also the framework management. What is your data quality? Who are your key stakeholders? What are they expecting? So basically shaping the tool to do what is right for the organization at scale. In order to leverage Densify, we have integrated it within a process of notification to inaction, which we found quite effective for this given organization. So we are talking about a large organization, several tens of thousands of employees with a very recent, I would say, FinOps at scale practices. So here, the challenge was to get the right level of attention, of trust, of efficiency, and basically getting a process that is convenient enough so that the return on effort for the stakeholders is always positive. It's not complicated to get recommendations when you're working with a cloud environment. You have Azure native recommendations from the advisors. You have numerous, I would say, sources of inputs. What matters is how can you convey the fact that this recommendation is not going to break your application, because if basically your cost optimization is done at the cost of your availability as a FinOps practitioner, you've failed and you've lost the traction that is key to get things, to build the momentum basically towards cost optimization. This is why we have partnered with Densify. As Andrew mentioned, the recommendation engine is obviously quite evolved, but it provides one thing which is really handy into this process of detecting to enacting, which is providing the rationales why the recommendation is good in the shape of an easy to understand PDF file. So we are using Densify as our go-to tool for compute optimization, getting these PDF reports, nesting them into an automated email, and we are turning this recommendation into push notifications. We have also put within the application the ability to very easily plan and validate or reject or postpone the recommendations, all into a one-stop shop. And in the backend, we have built automations so that the ITSM system can keep track of what has been done, when, by whom. And ultimately, we also keep track of each of the recommendations and the real impact on the amortized cost. This takes the shape of a set of dashboard. So one of them is what we call the optimization pipeline. It's effectively projecting what has been detected as areas of optimization and all of the opportunities into the organizational structure, and allowing multiple levels of stakeholders to read through the optimization potential and where we're at. You can look at it as sales funnels, essentially. So whatever spending approval is an opportunity of cost optimization that should be responded to. Then you have, has it been approved or has it been excluded? And ultimately, has it been enacted? Enacted meaning that it has been certified as correctly implemented through the billing data, and we have begun to record savings. So the aim of the game as a FinOps lead is making sure that each of the optimizations that have been detected get under the nose of the right person. So the quality of data is a prerequisite in order to make sure that we can send the correct recommendation towards the right people. Building this framework was also supported by a heavy lifting on the tagging quality and optimizing as well the framework of maintaining this tagging quality. Ultimately, what it leads to is building very detailed emails, and this is what a recommendation looks like. You would see the personas at the beginning of the email. The technical owner, the functional owner, the financial owner are all looped in because they all have a say into a decision of resizing a VM. The reason we did this is in order to basically to make this dialogue happening between a good idea and the ones who will benefit from it. They all need to share the same level of information. So what are the risks? What is your current utilization? What are we providing as a recommendation? And why you should take a moment to look at it. This is the estimated savings. On the right side, you can see a heat map, which is a very, I would say, simple abstract of the app owners reports that Andrew has overviewed. And you can see 3 buttons just right underneath. The first one is a link which takes to the UI in order to directly approve or exclude, and basically it gives you a cockpit view as a technical owner of everything that has been detected and do within your technical estate. You have the opportunity as well to go to the Azure portal and see the resource live. And the last button is the most tactical one, to see the detailed report. And this detailed report is a fantastic ground in order to have an educated discussion about the benefits and risks behind the VM optimization opportunities. The reason being is, as a technical owner, their KPIs, their areas of interest, is the application availability. So by design, they have an incentive to over-provision and to be on the very safe side when it comes to provisioning the resources and make sure that the application is highly available and is very responsive. So if we have only the technical owner within the loop, we are missing 2 parts of the equation. The application owner, in order to make sure as well that all the compliancy elements and the architecture stays safe. And the last persona is the financial owner, who will have a very strong incentive to shrink his TCO year over year. Here, we are providing a visual representation of the current state of consumption and the would-be consumption if they click on accept. And that's a very powerful tool to keep the discussion flowing. I remember a couple of times where this came very handy for large estates, where we had technical owners say, hey, I need this because look, I have a spike. And so this fine line is essentially, yes, your spike utilization. And because of one single spike, they were basically pushing for maintaining an over-provisioned VM. And having this visual representation and an educated decision on this, they took the lead knowing that they could safely size down, and with the approval of the functional and the functional owner. So it was a free-body decision, which was unanimous in the end. But without this kind of rationales of proving that basically you have done the homework, and not only you come with a cost optimization idea, but also a safe idea, you're not here to break things, it changes the burden of proof. Not only you come with an idea, but you show that there is very slim chances that things will go sideways. And it also allows to push the receivers and to explain why this idea would not apply to their workloads. Why are they out of the norm? And progressively, basically climb your way up through more streamlined practices such as passive approval or express approval and policy-driven optimization. Our framework is about detecting, notifying the right people through very high quality tagging data, fetching in a very streamlined way to validation, ensuring that we execute in a timely manner the approved change, and keeping track and showing back to build success stories by keeping track of the savings. At the beginning of the FinOps journey, you might not optimize all of these stages at once. You might begin your detection by only being reactive. Someone taps on your shoulder. I want to understand why my workload is costing me 3 times what it used to 3 months ago. You may not have automated notifications. Your validation might be only through emails or might not be tracked. But as time goes by, you can basically focus on what are your non-value added steps? Where are you losing time and yours and the one of your stakeholders, so that you can go into a more and more automated cycles. Here in the work phase, we could consider that it is continuous monthly cycles. So you would shoot recommendation, manage the life cycle of this recommendation. Is it still up to date? Does it need to be muted and replaced by something new? So you can automate your notification, and you put ceremonies basically, and a rhythm and a ground for keeping in close contact with your key stakeholders, your Pareto, who are your top 20% of your technical owners and cost center owners that you need basically to cherish and nourish with good ideas. The more you do that, the more you can build the trust to take them from active validation, which is essentially, here is an idea, please say yes, to passive validation, which is, here's an idea, unless stated otherwise, we'll do it for you, which is a fantastic way to save time and energy on all parties, but they need to trust you for that. The execution can be automated, like Andrew mentioned, and as we are keeping track of the savings, we can keep track of the resizing, and we can show back basically, hey, you have clicked accept, you have saved X amount of money across the past quarter. Thank you for playing the game. Let's play again. On the run phase, what we are aiming for is taking away the friction at all of these stages. So we want continuous weekly cycles with basically also reactive alerts if we see a deviation in the cost or in the consumption. Another very mature way of building trust would be not only to shoot recommendations for underutilization, but as well for overutilization, so that you can be as well a safeguard or a guardrail for the application stability. There is going to be a point in which cost optimization has been achieved, and you're, closer and closer to your threshold of maximum utilization. This is where basically you need to play in both directions, in also providing the opportunity to upsize when it is needed. The notifications being fully automated with a strong handshake with your ITSM would allow this kind of very mature and fast decision cycles. As well, having two-way sizing up and down allows for a stronger incentive towards passive validation and policy-driven. If you say that not only you will shrink, but you will upsize, it gives very strong grounds to basically level the grounds and make sure that everybody in the organization is having your back in order to get the developments where they need to be with the correct level of attention, so that you can click into the operating model, and in the end, everybody wins. When it comes to keeping track of the impact, you can also keep track of the avoided usage, so usage reductions, and have a serious game as well about missed savings, to make sure that not only you notify, but what has been pending is not pending for too long. So all of this comes into play when it comes into building basically an optimization engine at scale. And I believe, Andrew, now it's the time where we can double click into what can be done when it comes to policy-driven FinOps optimization.
Thank you for that. And I think as everyone can probably see, you guys have this down to a science. There's no surprise as far as the methodology for going through this and achieving success. You said a couple of things I'll pick up on, and I'll show the latest stuff on this front. You said upsizing. I find upsizing is interesting because it's a big enabler of downsizing in our perspective, because if you're going to make something smaller, but you have the ability to make it bigger again if needed, it gives the app teams confidence that they're going to go with you. It's not just a one-way trip. So that's kind of an interesting way that the ups are an enabler of the downs in some cases. And you used the phrase guardrails, which I think is a great segue into the next section, which is this right-hand side, this cloud resource control. So if you look at the progression that Antoine laid out there, one further progression on that, I think, Antoine, you or one of our joint customers use the phrase freedom in a box, is what if we can just do it through policy engines and let the customers do whatever they want within policy? So this is the new thing. I mean, for the record, Antoine didn't like that little new icon there. I think Accenture has very nice slides, and so I wouldn't see that on Accenture slide. But this is the new piece that I want to talk about just for a few more minutes. And the way this works is, as I mentioned earlier, instead of just saying do this one thing, we're going to say, well, we're just going to keep you from getting into trouble. And this can be done through the various policy engines that are in the stack. So we like this approach because there's kind of a choke point on what goes out in the environment in things like, I'll talk about Hashi Sentinel, because that's one that we've done integration with. AWS Config is another policy engine. Azure Policy, we've also integrated with. It's a really nice policy engine just built into Azure. So it catches everything going by. Cloud Custodian, similar one, has the same constructs that will do what I'm talking about. And the way this works is that we now have a new API that says, rather than telling you the one thing you should do, we're just going to tell you all the things that are viable for you to do, that green part of that map. So if I hit the API, I can basically get that map for an instance. So let's just say I have an instance that's a database server, for argument's sake. This map will say, well, here's all the stuff you can and can't run on. You need at least this much memory, and you need a disk, and you need all these other things. So for each workload, we know exactly what you can and can't do. So when somebody goes to deploy a new instance, change it, or even the one that you're currently on, just redeploy, this can catch it and say, wait a minute, that thing doesn't have a local disk. And we know you're using a local disk. So we can give you a warning, a technical warning that might not be a great idea. We won't stop you. You can stop you, but that's probably not advisable. We're going to let you go, but you're going to get a warning saying what you're doing may not be right. Or we watched you and at quarter end, you use a lot of memory and that thing doesn't have enough memory. So all the things I mentioned in that map that are part of the analytics would just surface through the policy engine, including, wait a minute, you're deploying something, there's a much cheaper option than what you're deploying. And this is where it gets interesting from a FinOps perspective, because if we go back to this map and just spend a minute here, this is a map, this is another Amazon map for our workload. I think it's the same one actually I showed earlier. And you can see at the bottom here, you're running on an instance that's $117 a month. And the one we're recommending, that R7i large on the right, is $78 a month. And so that $78 a month is important because we run all the numbers and then all the ML, pattern modeling, all the policy stuff. And we're saying, based on all that analytics, this is your best option. And it's $78. And that becomes a reference point. So I'm going to assess everything you're going to do through that lens now. And so even though I'm going to talk about a FinOps warning, it's basically the result of a very deep technical analysis. And this map, what we're looking at now, is if money is no object, you can do anything that's green. You can be a 48 XL if you want to. It'll just be super expensive. But what if I turn down that spend tolerance a notch? What if I say, I'm going to stop you from doing anything that's more than 10 times more than that optimal one, that reference point? This is what the map looks like. Okay, now all of these ones are options. All the yellow is more than 10 times more expensive. And so we're going to warn you if you go off into the yellow, back to the guardrails. We're going to tell you if you hit the red, tell you if you hit the orange, and if you hit the yellow. And I can keep turning this knob. Picture it like a giant FinOps knob you can turn. What about 5x? What about 2x? Okay, at 2x spend, if I'm saying you have to be within at least double that number, there's about 20 options you can run on, including the one you're currently on. That one is still fair game if I'm giving you this much leeway. What about 1.5 times, 50% more than optimal? So I'm going to stop you if you run trying to put on an instance, and the one that we're recommending is like 2/3 the price. We're going to warn you. And in this case, we're down to about 8 options, and the one you're currently on is no longer an option. So you're now non-compliant. You're not within that spend tolerance. So up to this point, we would have left you there, but now we're saying you need to act. You're spending too much. 1.2 times, if I keep going up this list, now there's only 2 options. These ones are both close in cost. They're not the same, but they're close. And either of those is an option, and they're within 20%. So we're going to let you do either of those things. And as I go up this list to what we call zero tolerance, there's only one answer. It's the best one. So the innovation, I think, here is that it's like a giant FinOps knob. So we're doing very technical analysis, but then we have this giant FinOps input of how much freedom do I want to give people? And the more freedom, the more overspend. And so I can tune that. And over time, I can turn that down. And we, and Antoine, we all see this as a potential way to give a very progressive approach that has a really strong maturation curve where we can start to turn the knob down and drive maturation in a customer. They can do what they want, but we're just going to rein things in this way that we're not telling you what to do. We're just going to warn you if you're going off into the guardrails. And the way this looks from the process flow perspective is, again, it's beautiful because it does it right in the pipeline. Again, depending on the policy engine you do, you'll catch everything flying through here. And so it's a single point of control for FinOps now, where if they say, hey, for my company or my team or that app or that account, I'm not going to let you go over 1.5x. And you can jointly agree on that with the app teams. Hey guys, can we jointly agree that I will give you a warning if you're trying to deploy something that's way more expensive than the optimal? And generally app teams would agree to that. And when you do that, you get a new map with much more yellow and much less green. And the next time the app teams go to deploy something and it's not in the green, they get a spend tolerance warning. And again, the nice thing about this is it's happening automatically and it's happening in the stack and goes right back to them in their tooling. And I think this is pretty important. I'll show you a Terraform example. If you're using Azure policy, it goes into the Azure compliance console. Each of these has their own console. So the tool I use to deploy my app is going to give me a warning saying that you're doing something too expensive. And this is what that looks like in Sentinel. So when you do a plan and a deploy, you'll see soft failures. In this case, we're not stopping you, but we're giving you warnings saying, whoa, there's a resource violation. You're outside spend tolerance. You're trying to deploy an M6i 4XL, and we're saying there's a much cheaper one. You'll work on a T3 medium for that matter. This is a pretty extreme example, but I'm not stopping you, but it's coming right back to where you work and where you do your work. All those different warnings I mentioned just pop up in the Sentinel console. So as the app team or as the engineer or the SRE deploying this thing, I'll see it right there. And so we think it fundamentally changes the FinOps paradigm. Again, like I say, Antoine and team call it freedom in a box, because in one hand, it lets the engineers do what they want, but within jointly established controls. So I have freedom, but I'm going to make sure I stay within those guardrails. And the analogy I give is like a virus scanner, where instead of me sending you an email saying, please remove these files from your laptop because they're dangerous, and me resending it every month and resending it every month, hoping you'll act, let's just both agree we're going to put a virus scan on your laptop, and it'll just tell you itself, and it'll take care of it. And we're just going to jointly agree on what it's going to do. There's a lot of analogy like that. It's a control in the pipeline that we jointly establish, and then you guys run and do your app functionality all you want, and you can go fast. From the FinOps perspective, it's very empowering because, like I mentioned, the spend tolerance is not just an arbitrary financial limit. It's not like saying, hey, I'm going to limit you to $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month or some quota. It's based on the deep analysis of what your optimal choice is, and everything's relative to that. So it's a very different kind of financial control than just a limit or a quota. The warnings come from the stack. Like I said, you don't need to chase people down with reports. It's just going to happen in line. And because it goes to that single control point, it'll work regardless of how it's deployed. If somebody's using the UI or they're using Terraform, it'll still catch these things. So we think it's a bit of a game changer. It's the newest thing when you look at Antoine's progression and maturation. We think just kind of start to add more to the right of it, where there's now more options of how customers can achieve that FinOps benefits in a way that's extremely practical and doable for them. So with that, just want to close off. This is interesting in this area. Actually, this is linked to the Kubernetes report. We also have a similar one for the cloud resource management space, where we're considered a leader. I think what we're describing here is pretty advanced, and we're happy to say that we get rated well. Obviously, the fact that Accenture uses us is huge for us, because that's credibility in itself, but the analysts as well confirm that. I also wanted to mention Intel Cloud Optimizer. I mentioned Intel at the start. The work we're doing with Accenture is also jointly done with Intel, and one of our joint customers, there's a program called Intel Cloud Optimizer. And the nice thing about that is that Intel will sponsor the use of Densify for an initial period if you qualify. So if that sounds interesting, there's a QR code to get more from that. Intel is a great partner with both us and with Accenture. And everything I've been describing is available through Intel Cloud Optimizer as well, and jointly with Accenture. And there's some other resources if you're interested. We have a podcast that I host if you're interested in listening to someone talk while you're driving. We have some very interesting guests on that. And so different resources. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks for your time.